So I think taking risks is very, very important to bring about significant societal change. If you don't take a big bet, you could fail, but it also provides you an opportunity of moving the needle.
Hello, welcome, a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Apalak. Welcome to another episode of Teal Time. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. I am speaking to a man whom we have seen literally, if I may say, growing up in the tech community. And if I could use a phrase, this man really needs no introduction. In common parlance, as I say, he's a household name in the technical world. Right? It's an absolute honor to have Mr. Chugh with us. We have Mr. Manoj Chugh. Very warm welcome, Manoj. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this conversation.
Apalak, I am very, very honored to be a part of this conversation, and I think that our associationship, which goes back so many years, brings such pleasant memories, and I'm truly honored that we are sitting together today to have this conversation. Right. So the honor and pleasure is entirely mine.
Right. Mr. Chugh, I'll tell you what, and I've told this to you previously, you have introduced me to many fascinating new areas, right? I remember long time back, you came to our organization. Back in those days, I used to work for another organization, and I remember you introduced us to a concept called data scientists, right? And back in that time, we were not really aware. So I think your contribution to the tech community, to the enterprise tech community has been profound. But before I get into that, I think let's start from the very beginning, right? I want to know a little bit about you, the individual, your formative years, where you did your schooling from, your college, and more importantly, probably a little bit more focus. And I'll tell you why it matters, because when you were growing up and when people were looking for jobs, people used to tend to look out for government jobs because they were seeking stability. And your story is checkered with trailblazing success stories across the private sector. So all to you, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Apalak. First of all, I must say that I am very grateful to you, and I must say that I'm very deeply moved that you remembered something which I said so many years ago. And it set me, back thinking in terms of how much the world has changed since then. And I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to talk about that. But let me begin from where you want me to begin. So I belong to Delhi. I come from a middle-class family. My parents came to this wonderful city after the partition of India. Delhi welcomed them with open arms. This beautiful city provided them an opportunity to build their lives. And therefore, I must say in every true manner, personally, I am a Delhiite in every whichever way. My mother was a school teacher, my father was a government servant, and right from the very beginning, as it happens in middle-class families, the focus is on only one thing, education. Right. And so I guess my early childhood, very much like yours, and of course you come from an academic background, was very much focused on education. Right. I was blessed and fortunate that for my college, I got the opportunity of going to IIT Kharagpur.
Oh, wow.
And being from Delhi, going on to Eastern India, I think at that point in time, everyone kind of bites their tongue and says, are you really going to the right place?
Right.
It is far from wherever it is. But then I guess, at the end of the day, destiny takes you where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And I was very, very blessed to study in a wonderful institution. And I give tremendous credit to IIT for what I am today. It provided me an opportunity of being a wholesome individual, just not focused on studies, but I loved my dramatics. I loved literary activities. We were speaking about your coming to our college campus for Springfest.
Right.
So, being a part of Springfest for so many years, it was just fascinating. And therefore, I think I owe a lot to IIT. And your question around jobs, I would say you're absolutely right. At our time, most of the jobs that were advertised were government jobs or jobs in government-owned institutions, public sector undertakings, and so on. But we were fortunate, having studied in a good premium institution, we had a lot from the corporate sector who would come to campus to hire. Our story is very interesting. By the time our hiring season had got over, I did the 5-year course at that time. Engineering was 5 years. Maybe they thought that at that time we guys needed to study a bit more than guys nowadays, just in lighter vein. But in the last semester, 5th year, as I was graduating out, I was blessed and fortunate. I had the opportunity of choosing from one amongst 4 firms. Okay. Now, that just happened by providence. And out of those 4 firms, 2 were in the chemical engineering industry. I studied to become a chemical engineer. Right. And 2 of them were in the IT industry. Both of them were with startups. Now, at that point in time, IBM had left India, and there was a big focus around, we must have homegrown Indian IT companies. So they were just kind of mushrooming. So I kind of reflected back and thought that if I took a job with one of the stable engineering firms, I could see my career in front of me. And I wasn't sure if that would be truly exciting. But I knew it would be stable, I'll have a good job, I'll have a decent standard of living. I knew that I would maybe retire from a senior management position. And so all of that was pretty much kind of known, if you would agree, from a roadmap perspective. But I just thought it may be more interesting to do something exciting, something in a new area, something where perhaps my career could take a different trajectory. But it was unknown. The firms were too small. They may or may not even exist a few years from the time I joined them. So I weighed the risks between the two. I was 21 years old. When you're 21, you tend to sometimes take very rash, brash, impulsive decisions. You could say that. Yeah. I chose the IT industry. So as I graduated out, I joined the IT industry. I joined one of the computer firms with whom I began my journey, a wonderful journey, which has lasted 41 years in the corporate world. So I give full credit to IIT for the opportunity, for what it made me, for letting me be the individual that I am, for allowing me to follow my passion and do what I really want.
No, thanks to the rash decision that you took back in those days, that's why we have you here. So I think that age of impulsiveness at times leads to great decisions, right? But and I think I've really followed your career,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chugh, and one tends to suggest that when you look at your career, you've pretty been the hallmark of the right changes. You were with startups, as you said, which are no more startups. They are the representatives of the IT services sector. So you've been with HCL, you've been with Wipro, right? And then you gravitate to another sector.
Yes.
You moved to telecom sector. Then you went to global multinationals. You've been with EMC, Cisco. Then you went to Tech Mahindra, right? So in this journey, while it's easy for me to say that you were in the right place at the right time, but what makes me wonder, it's important for you to be aware what is the right place and what is the right time. So for all our friends who are listening to it, and I'm sure there are a lot of youngsters who are listening to this, how do you make sure and how do you know you are there at the right place at the right time? So everybody wants to be ahead of the curve. How do you chart the course?
Well, Apalak, first of all, if I were to, at a very high level, make a disclaimer, a statement, I think destiny plays a role.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you keep your ears and eyes closed.
Right.
And I think if you look at the pivots in my career, they started from the time when I had to make a decision between 2 kinds of job roles. One in the IT sector, one in the core engineering sector. So I chose the IT sector. I mean, the options were in front of us. I could have gone to core engineering. Maybe I might have headed a plant somewhere, etc., etc. But this is where I built my career. I think as I went along in my journey, and you mentioned about my switch to telecommunications, which was actually in satellite networks at that time. I had been in the systems integration industry for quite a few years. And one of the roles towards the end of my systems integration career was in terms of establishing a telecommunication business unit.
Wow.
That means
Back in those days.
That means taking IT technology to telecommunication service providers.
Right.
And that gave me an opportunity to look at what telecommunication industry could look like in the future. Now, there were very weak signals at that point in time on what it could look like.
Right.
But what I realized was that there was something interesting, exciting that was happening in that area.
Right.
And I will tell you how that really painted the future of many of my decisions.
Please.
So as I kind of looked at the future, I knew that telecommunications would undergo significant rapid change, not just from a technology perspective, but in terms of adoption and the kind of services that one could see going forward and the acceleration.
Our country forever.
Absolutely, it did. And as I looked at that, I think what also kind of knocked at my door was an opportunity. At that point in time, India had liberalized from an economic perspective. It was post 1991. And a lot of global firms were looking at India as an important market. And one of those firms was in the satellite networks business, a firm called Scientific Atlanta.
Right.
They came knocking at my door and they said that, look, here's a wonderful opportunity for you to set up our operations in India. So I told them, look, how large is the team? They said, we are looking at the team. And I said, excuse me? And they said, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So we want you to come and we want you to start. Now here I was, general manager of a business, lots of people working for me. Right. I was very comfortable, I had gone through the pains and aches of working for small firms and we had grown the business. Right. So this was the time when you would say I could sit back, relax and enjoy the ride. And I thought to myself that here's an opportunity, maybe for me to reinvent myself. And I think one of the things, Apalak, which has always bothered me, and maybe that's why I took the decisions that I did, was that I used to ask myself a question every now and then, that am I succeeding because of the firm that I am in, or am I succeeding because of me as an individual, as a professional? Because many times you kind of get confused, right? You think that you're doing a great job, but you later realize that, it was because of the company that people were willing to open doors and meet you and so on. So I said, what if my business card changed to a firm which nobody has even heard of? And that would be the true challenge of myself as a professional. And I think when you are in your 30s, you don't mind challenging yourself much more. Your risk-taking ability is a lot more. So I decided to take the job with this firm. It was in satellite communications. And we were in an area which was very, very, very helpful, created a positive impact for our country because our tele-density was poor, our terrestrial infrastructure was totally inadequate. And therefore, if we wanted reliable communications in our country, whether it was for business, whether it was for disaster recovery, whether it was for government applications, the only way you could provide that was through a satellite network. And bringing the satellite network to the corporate private sector, in addition to bringing it to government-owned entities, as well as to governments, was super critical. So I think
this is so much happening today in the VSAT business.
Absolutely.
Everybody who's a big setup in the tech world is gunning for that sector now.
Absolutely. And so therefore, this was, in the 90s, and I took the plunge. We were very successful. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. But so I think that was an important pivot, that what I had seen in the telecommunications industry, the challenges that we were seeing in our India, the opportunity that I saw with satellite networks to help improve the quality of communications, particularly for critical infrastructure, motivated me to make that change and take that plunge. As I did that, few years from then, as you would know, we had started seeing early noises and hearing them about the internet. And therefore, I chose to move into the networking industry. And my motivation of going to the networking industry was because I knew that internet was going to change the way we exist. And so that switch was a natural switch from satellite networks going on to terrestrial infrastructure, so that I have the opportunity of really shaping internet adoption in our beautiful country. I didn't want to let that opportunity go by. As we set up the internet infrastructure, what I realized was that the volume, velocity, and variety of data was so significant that we had to find ways in which we could keep that data, manage that data, store that data, harness that data. Because it was my belief that at the end of the day, when you talk about information technology, the I comes before the T.
Right.
We always talk about T, the technology, but we don't talk about I. Today we do, then we did not. So if IT begins with I, we need to focus on information and build infrastructure for information. So I switched gears and moved into the information infrastructure industry. And when a lot of people said, Manoj, why did you do that? You're doing so well. In the networking industry, I said, so much data is flying through these networks. We need to go build parking lots. So that's what I now need to do, go into the information infrastructure industry. So I think I was able to see that data is going to be critical. The need to build information infrastructure as a prerequisite for us to be able to leverage data as an important asset would be important going forward in the future and would be mandatory as we peeked into the future. I had worked by then for about 30 years up there. And the entire stack of technology I had reasonably, I would say, well understood over those 30 years. And I thought that this was a great opportunity for me to take a different view to leveraging and harnessing the technology stack that I had helped in my small, humble way to build, which was bring applications on top, drive services, and help customers around the world. And that motivated me to make the change to Mahindra Satyam, which then got integrated into Tech Mahindra. And I think that certainly my learnings and experiences from the technology world helped me a lot as we were able to help customers move on their digital transformation journey.
I could listen to this story, and when you listen to a story like this, you tend to forget the questions that I had for you. But I remember the initial point you spoke about destiny. I can't show my goosebumps because your story, like you said, and I'll allude to the follow-up question is destiny played a very big role, and you said, what challenged you, and you spoke about, that you were in a very, very good position, right? But then you question, is this my success or is it being because of the organization? And I see in retrospect, because ours is a very small organization, I've been blessed to work with very established organizations all my career. So when you work for yourself, when you start something small, that's the thing that you are questioning actually, which propels you to go forward. So, and the question to you, Mr. Chugh, is while destiny plays a big role, and I completely agree to that, how do you offset or balance the risk appetite? Because in all our career, today we are celebrating your success. You've done so much for this community, but we would not have had this conversation if one of them would have backfired, right? You took, and these were, for instance, when you worked for HCL and Wipro, they were not HCL and Wipro as they are today.
Absolutely.
When you work for telecom sector, then you moved to Cisco, then to EMC, then to Tech Mahindra. You joined them when they did not become what they are today, in India at least.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
How important is for youngsters or anybody for that matter to take the risk and know a way to offset that risk? I think that's a question that needs to be answered.
Apalak, very, very well said. And again, you've taken me back in my journey, and you're speaking about risks and how to mitigate risks and the kind of risks one needs to take. I think when you're in the technology business, risk is an integral part of life, because things are changing so rapidly that you have to take bets. You have to kind of look at what is going to pay off and what is not. Let me take a few examples and share with you some very interesting points at which I could have failed very badly. I'm going back, and we'll go decade by decade. So I want to go back to the 80s. In the 80s, you would remember that if multiple users had to work on a specific application, multi-user systems were built based on microprocessors. And the big challenge with some of these systems was that the application performance would decline substantially as you added more users, because now so many more users are sharing same limited resource. So I remember that there was a very, very large RFP with a very significant government organization. Unfortunately, I can't name the organization because it's in the security area. and they were planning to revamp their entire IT infrastructure. And like anyone else, they had come out with an RFP for a large number of multi-user systems. When I looked at the RFP, I asked myself a question, that if I am going to be the N+1th guy who is going to turn up with another mousetrap, what difference am I going to make to this organization? What is the impact that I'm going to create to help them achieve their goals and to help them achieve what they are setting out to do? And given the sensitivity of that organization, I felt that we should be putting our best foot forward. Now, Apalak, long story short, I was one of the 10 shortlisted bidders.
Right.
And I knew that unless I did something dramatic and different, I would not succeed. Because ultimately, what would they do? All you 10 guys look similar. I'm going to take a commercial approach to it and be done with it, right? And I said, that's not the way they're going to get the best system. Now, mid-80s, Ethernet was not well known. In fact, the CSMA CD protocol was just about becoming, I would say, within academic circles, quite well known, but not within commercial domain.
Right.
And certainly in India at that time, we were a closed economy.
Right.
We didn't have the technology at that time. And I took a big, bold bet and went in and said that I am going to offer a solution which is based upon CSMA CD technology called Ethernet.
Wow.
And I went and told this agency, rather than every user sharing resources, my architecture will deliver to them 100% of the resource that we are giving to them in terms of compute, network, print, etc.
Right.
Obviously, very compelling story, right? Oh wow! Now everyone's going to get, the full thali rather than having to share the thali, right? Sounds great, but will this technology work? And I think my ability to show them that this technology exists, it will work, and it will get delivered in the time frames that they were looking for, finally motivated them to take the decision in that direction. So the mid-80s, we had a very massive Ethernet-based multi-location network operating with one of our very important agencies of the government in India, and all delivered by the private sector. Right. Now imagine once you go and by the way, this was one of the largest deals we had won in that year, but that's not important. What's important is that this then got replicated in the government, got replicated, in the corporate sector. And today, if I ask anyone, do you have a LAN in your office based on Ethernet? It is like, what is this guy smoking? Who doesn't have it, right? Every little mom and pop shop has it.
Right.
But I am talking of the mid-80s when nobody had even heard of this technology. Right. So I think taking risks is very, very important to bring about significant societal change. Right. If you don't take a big bet, you could fail, but it also provides you an opportunity of moving the needle. I'll give you the second example, Scientific Atlanta Satellite Networks. Same thing. I got in. Satellite networks at that time, because of bandwidth and so on and so forth, they're using satellites, they're going up 36,000 kilometers, coming back, were largely used for data. And my point of view was that data is good, but not good enough. Because God forbid if you have a disaster, you need video, you need voice, right? Imagine if on data you're trying to communicate and you're trying to resolve issues, not going to happen. So the technology that I put forth was voice, data, video, all three over a satellite network by giving a clear link.
As VOD as we know now.
So that was at that point in time that used to be called DAMA technology. And one of the firms that you worked for, Cyber Media, played a very important role, working very closely with me to get the message out to the market. So we were able to move a lot of the market from just data-oriented applications on satellite networks to voice, data, video, combined multimedia applications using satellite networks. So in disaster recovery, in a lot of corporates which were in far-flung areas where you couldn't communicate at all. Imagine.
Can I just ask you one question?
Please.
Purely out of curiosity.
Please.
How do you manage the bandwidth? Because you have certain bandwidth for data.
Yes.
Now you equip that for audio.
Yes.
And equip with video, which is very data intensive.
Yes.
How do you manage the bandwidth?
You give a clear channel. And then you allocate out bandwidth accordingly based upon media type. That's how we did it. It was called DAMA technology at that time. The technology that was used for data was TDM, TDMA.
Right.
So I came in and I said, look, The fact is you need data, that's important, but you also need voice and video. So if you have got applications, if you are an organization which wants to write voice, data, video over satellite network, then here is an option. So therefore, moving the needle and providing an option to the market, which then allows new world use cases to dramatically shift the way in which they were operating, was a very, very positive, I would say. So I took a risk in the market that when the whole market, I could have happily just tried to sell TDM, TDMA, everyone knew data is important and moved along. But I said, let's move the needle. I'll come to networking. Interesting. I don't want to talk about the internet. We know how the internet has changed the world.
Right.
I'm blessed and fortunate to have been a part of building out internet infrastructure in our country. But that is not the only important thing. The bigger story there is, I realized that India would have a dearth shortage of talent around networking. Because you go build these networks, then who's going to be there to deploy it, support, sustain, architect, and so on. So I partnered with academia and brought new world curriculum into many of our institutions so that we could create a pool of networking professionals in India. And when I was doing this whole play and this whole journey, many of my colleagues at the time came and said, Manoj, what are you doing? I said, why? They said, the work that you are doing, you will see the results only years later. So it is going to benefit your successors. It will not benefit you. And my only answer to them was, if everyone thought like that, nobody would ever grow a mango tree. Right. So I said, guys, let's just focus on this. And India has created the largest pool of networking professionals in the world. So you have to take those risks. I did not live in the organization to see the full fruit of that. But certainly today, when I look back, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that if there is one thing which India doesn't have a dearth of, it is of networking professionals, right? As you look at CVs of engineers who are coming out, you will see that in front of you. I'll just take a couple of minutes on the next story. And the next story is around information infrastructure. When we got into the industry and I moved into that area, I found that the entire focus of customers was on compute.
Right.
My story to them was, compute is good, but not sufficient. What is more important to you is data. And so it took quite a while to bring about a mindset change in the market that when you are looking at architecture, it needs to be data centric. You need to first look at data infrastructure and then look at the compute. And it is not one compute platform. You could have one compute running, let's say, your email application. You could have another compute running your ERP application. You could have another compute running data warehousing, so on and so forth. But the data that you're massaging, you're working on, is the same data set.
Absolutely.
So data has to be at the heart of your architecture. Believe me, that is not the way the world thought. So in the mid-2000s, as I moved into the information infrastructure industry, the first thing that we had to do was change mindsets of the industry, that it is about data and data infrastructure. That has to be at the heart of your architecture and not compute. Because the challenge I would always have is when I went to a customer, they would first get the guys who were offering compute. And I would say, look, what is more important, compute or data? They would say, why? I would say a compute platform will get obsolete, not your data. You'll continue to need your data. You're going to build upon this data set going forward in the future. So you began the conversation by talking about data scientists. So that's the history, right? That's why that whole concept of data scientist, because
actually it corresponds to the time that I met you first.
Absolutely.
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. So that's when we were talking about a mindset change with customers, telecommunication service providers, with large enterprises, with governments, turning around and saying that if you have to look at architecture, you have to look at the next generation, you have to look at data, and then basically architect everything around that. So I think that was the other pivotal piece, which kind of drove a lot of my own thinking. To answer your question, at each level there was a risk, from multi-user to Ethernet, going on in satellite networks, from voice, data, video, from data to multimedia, looking at networks, but not looking just at the technology piece, but looking at people, looking at the impact on society, and therefore creating a new pool of professionals which never existed in the country. And then as I moved to information infrastructure, how do I bring data at the heart of the conversation and decision, and not continue with the old world way in which we were thinking. I'm blessed that in all of these areas, I think I was able to move the needle a little bit.
In fact, in my old small world, my learning, just listening to you is, yes, you took risks, but they were to a certain extent calculated risks. B, but more importantly, they were backed with the right intention. I think when you took risks, it was not for your own personal gains alone. I am also it would be wrong to say that, somewhere you had a larger theme in mind, right? Like you said, I love the analogy that you gave of the mango tree. If that was the way one looked at it, nobody would plant a mango tree. I think we especially in a country like ours, we live in a very hyper-competitive market, right? Where they say it's a dog-eat-dog world. But in such a scenario, how important are traits like honesty, sincerity, truth? Because what we're told, in trying to be practical, quote unquote, you somewhere get phased. I ask this question because it's a very important question for me, at least. I would love to hear from you.
It's been very important to me as well, and particularly when you've had a long career in the corporate world, these are home truths that one needs to face. I come from a middle-class family, and what has been very important to me through my years of growing have been the values that have been instilled in me by my parents, by my teachers, by the institution where I have studied. And these values have been incredibly important to me. I can tell you, Apalak, I can put my hand on my heart and say that I've always operated within the sandbox of integrity. As I say that, of course, there have been so many people I have come across who are susceptible and have been susceptible to inducements. I have decided to stay away and walk away. I've been blessed and fortunate that I have had the honor and opportunity of working with many people who are honest, who are sincere, who are hardworking, and who have the right intent in their heart. And therefore, I think my experience has taught me that like people beget like people. And you spoke about sincerity and the impact. And I recollect two of the organizations that I worked for. I think my dedication, sincerity, if that's the word that I'm allowed to use,
please.
pushed me into looking at life a little differently and not just from a selfish point of view. I think that also motivates you to follow the path of righteousness. When I worked for these organizations, I realized that we had a lot of good talent in India, which we were not leveraging. Everyone wanted to go to US and do work. And therefore, if I could convince these technology companies to come and invest significantly in India, that would perhaps help to keep a lot of engineers here and provide good, honest jobs. Because that's also very important. What are the kind of roles and jobs available in the market? Are you being forced by circumstance to do stuff that you don't want to do? So if we get high quality jobs, then we can make sure that the overall quality of our people and society improve. And I was blessed and fortunate to convince two very large technology companies, and they became the pivots to more and more technology companies coming in and setting up shop in India. Today we talk about how the GCCs are such a big success in India, but we have to go back into history to understand who were the early guys who came in, why did they come in? And my only statement to them at that time was, because everyone would say, Manoj, that's no big deal, people will come for cost. I said, no, people will come for cost, but they will not stay for cost, they will stay for quality, and they will invest for innovation. So we have to make sure that we keep moving up the value chain, and honesty, integrity, sincerity of everyone working will enable that to happen. So I think your own value systems have to reflect in the decisions that you're making, and those decisions have to have a larger societal impact. It is not about Manoj Chugh making his number or not. This was not about that at all. So I wholeheartedly agree with you that those value systems are incredibly important. I want to send a message through you to everyone that please guys, if you're honest, if you're sincere, if you're dedicated, good guys can still win.
Absolutely. I think, when someone like you says this, it gets reinforced. And in fact, moving on, Mr. Chugh, I have one question. Again, it's an important question from the perspective of societal impacts. So when we think of technology, right? We speak about a lot of leading edge technology. Nowadays, we hear a lot about generative AI, 5G, cloud, and so on and so forth. And they've been instrumental to make disruptive changes all across. But when we typically look at technology, the impacts that we see is to do with industries which are confined to urban metros. But here in the country, this is where it becomes a larger issue. We are a 1.4 billion people country, and with a very big rural sector. How do you see it? Because you have managed work at scale. How can emerging technologies like, say, 5G, like, say, IoT, right, like, say, edge computing, say, AI, can help our rural population? Because let's understand and accept and acknowledge that constitutes still more than 80% of our population. Right? Your thoughts to this?
Apalak, very well said. I like to begin with the positives.
Yeah, please.
There have been two great levelers in our country. The first is internet, which I have personally been a part of. And the second is smartphones. Both of these have been very strong enablers as far as rural India is concerned.
Right.
And you spoke about generative AI and other things. And I think because of the usage of internet, because of the usage which has deeply penetrated in rural India through smartphones and similar technologies, the good news for us is that today we have a much deeper understanding of the real needs of rural India. Secondly, we also have a much better understanding of their earning cycles. We know that in rural India, majority of the people earn their own livelihoods.
Right.
They are, for the lack of any other word, true entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a farmer, whether it's somebody who's self-employed. So in rural India, that becomes incredibly important. But we have never really understood what those income streams have been, because a lot of that has not been in the formal sector. But because of technology and the penetration of technology, our understanding of their spending patterns, our understanding of their behavior, our understanding of their cash flows and the cycles of those cash flows is much better today. Because of that, we can certainly help them improve their standards of living by, for example, offering them better credit terms. If we offer them better credit terms, they will be motivated to spend. And if we can marry their credit terms with their earning cycles, then it becomes a win-win situation for everyone. The second is local produce. Marketplaces providing an opportunity for those. The third is, you spoke about all these wonderful technologies. These wonderful technologies today provide an opportunity where you can drive standardization, where you can do testing of many of the products which are produced locally, because once you are able to brand them as quality products, the world is their market. In the past, we just couldn't do it at the local level. Today, we can do it at their doorstep because of these technologies. Then we talk about the whole thing around bringing jobs to people. Today, we are bringing people to metro cities where the jobs are. With these technologies, wherever we find talent, we can create a micro hub. Right? We can create an ancillary.
Which is a need.
Which is absolutely the need today. We can go and create local industry, and we can provide significant motivation for people to continue to live where they are living, because they love their quality of life in terms of fresh air, in terms of just the environment, which certainly is much better than what we have in the cities we keep grappling every day. So I think as far as rural India is concerned, these technologies are going to be game-changing. They are going to drive rural prosperity. 20 years from now, rural India is going to look very different as compared to what it is today, because of our ability to leverage these technologies, whether it is in precision agriculture, whether it is in terms of contributing to their livelihoods, whether it is in terms of opening the window of the world to them.
Right. Mr. Chugh, my penultimate question here is, and I think you alluded to that briefly, and I actually liked that point of yours when you said that these people today are probably coming for cost, but tomorrow they'll come for quality. And I think I love that point of yours. And my question to you is also around this: is you've been part of the IT service sector in your initial, and I spent a sizable amount with that sector. And we're very proud to admit and say that that we are one of the largest when it comes to IT services. But as a nation, as we go forward, with the advent of new age technologies like AR, VR, IoT, 5G, and so on and so forth, like I said, do you feel a transition, if not a transition, at least a coexistence of IT services with products is essential for us to keep pace with the world? Because while we are right at the top as far as IT services go, I think there is some distance to go as far as IT products go. What is your view to this?
My view is that you shouldn't look at IT for the sake of IT. We have to look at IT from the lens of a customer.
Right.
The Indian IT services industry has done a phenomenal job over the last many decades in terms of being able to understand the pulse of the customer and deliver to that promise. And I am very confident that going forward in the future, the Indian IT industry will continue to do so. I think what we need to remember is our undying focus on the customer and the needs of the customer. What does the customer want? And as long as we remain focused, we will be successful. So we need to understand the customer. We need to understand the customer's customer. We recognize today that the customer is becoming incredibly intelligent today thanks to generative AI, which can curate complex information. So you have to remain ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
That means you need to upskill yourself day in and day out so that you are ahead. The second thing is that today's customers are very different as compared to yesterday's customers. You look at the younger generation. The younger generation today wants to work with organizations which care for the environment. They want to work with organizations which want to work with people who care for the planet. Sustainability is a real and big issue. Carbon neutrality is a real and big issue. And I think that customers will work with those organizations which are doing their bit to sustain the planet. So I think if we start looking at technology, whether it is through products, whether it is through services, we should look at it from the eyes of the customer. What is it that our customer wants?
Absolutely.
So I would say for the Indian IT services industry, please continue to remain focused on the customer and you will never go wrong.
Absolutely. And that's the catchphrase actually. It's when you have consumerization of technology, everybody knows what they want and what they expect out of everything. In fact, you spoke about youngsters, you spoke about the Gen Z or the millennials as they call it. Before I sign off, what are your words of wisdom to all our friends who are listening to this? You've had a checkered career for the past 40 years and continuing, touch wood. What would be your advice to them?
Well, Apalak, I would only ask everyone to reflect back on the recent unfortunate incidents on the pandemic. When we had the pandemic, you would recollect that literally overnight, all of us were working from home, studying from home, shopping from home, entertaining ourselves from home. Everything worked.
Right.
It did work.
Absolutely.
Have we asked ourselves, how did it work? Had any organization planned their disaster recovery drills assuming 100% of employees would work from home?
Never.
Did any university do a drill saying, what if 100% of our students were home, we would continue to be able to teach them, etc., etc. The fact is that everything continued unabated. Everything continued in a way, of course, except for physical connectivity and presence and so on, right? Worked in the way in which it should have worked. Organizations recorded highest ever profits. Organizations spoke about highest ever productivity during the time of the pandemic. All that enabled by technology. How many of us have really reflected back and thought, how did this happen? We had not really planned for it. So somebody, some few, some people, decades ago, had been plotting and planning. Whether it was networks, whether it was network infrastructure, whether it was the skills, whether it was the thought that we need to create robust, resilient abilities as an organization. Somebody was thinking, somebody was doing this work. It was happening simultaneously. And I can tell you, I give this entire credit to my generation of colleagues in the IT industry. I think all of us can pat ourselves on the back and say, you know what? When it came to the crunch, we did not let our country down.
Right, absolutely.
And my real message to all the youngsters is, Are you guys thinking about the future? Are you guys helping build the future? What are you guys doing to make sure that as a country, we continue to remain resilient and strong going forward in the future? 30, 40 years from now, will you be able to say that I pat myself on the back, that I did something good and I enabled my country to succeed? That is my message to them.
I think beautifully summed up. Mr. Chugh, due to paucity of time, we'll probably have to call it a day. I hope this is just the start of our conversations. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you. I look forward to many such conversations, is all I'd like to end a note on. Thank you so much for today.
And Apalak, thank you very much for the opportunity. You brought back so many wonderful memories.
Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.